The MCU is a powerhouse. There just really isn't any other way to say it. In 10 years, they've made 18 films and brought in $14 billion at the global box office. The 2010s is the era of the superhero film. But when we looked at any other point in time, superhero films were nothing more than a joke, as if B films were given massive budgets. So how did Marvel rise above the odds, and how do they continually beat every other studio?
What is the story with that cellophane S that Superman rips off his chest and throws at the bad guy?
Prepare to be destroyed, Superman.
What was that?
Yeah, take that, you jerk.
To understand where we are, we have to understand where we came from. The early days of the superhero film were often camp-filled tales of men with either money or power that ordinary people didn't have. Filmmakers didn't look to the positive aspects of their comic book counterparts. Instead, they took to the overtop nature that the medium created. The 1960s gave us Adam West and all the glory of the Batman shark spray. The 1970s gave us Superman. And while many argue that this film is great, let's just say I tend to disagree. Any film in which Superman stops to save a cat from a tree can't be that great in my book. By the time Superman 4 came out, the people had given up on the character. What essentially turned a blockbuster into a B film with its bad acting, horrible script, and cheap graphics. There's little hope for the genre. Things would change, though, in 1989 with Tim Burton's Batman. This film showed the world what a comic book film could be. Serious, dark, well written, and overall, just really well done. Was it still campy? Yeah, but its campiness came second to the overall story, instead of the story being built around it. What little hope was given, though, was short-lived. Enter Batman Forever. Looking for guidance from the Adam West era instead of what Tim Burton had done with the last two films, we were given an over-the-top mess. Jim Carrey as the Riddler acting like he was Harry from Dumb and Dumber, and Tommy Lee Jones as the Joker doing a Two-Face impersonation. We're not even going to talk about Batman and Robin. If someone ever says they're putting one of these two films on, run fast and don't turn back. It was the early 2000s when we got our first Marvel films. Of course, that's not counting the made-for-TV films of the 90s, where Captain America steals cars and runs away, which is a sight to see.
Would you please pull over the car? I am going to get sick.
Oh, okay, all right.
Hey! Captain! Are you okay? Yeah. Hold it!
And never mind. Just put those films in the fire with Batman and Robin. And where were we? Oh yes. The early 2000s.
Patrick, air is not good!
You're just being shy. Don't worry, buddy. You're doing fine. I won't let you blow this.
Ang Lee's Hulk, Daredevil, Fantastic Four, and Ghost Rider. All these movies were not good, and they definitely do not hold up. They were plagued by campiness, awful CGI, and bad writing. Ang Lee tried to make the Hulk film a comic put to life, splitting the screens as if they were panels of a page. Although the scene where the helicopter shoots a missile at the Hulk and he grabs it, bites off the explosive and spits it back was one of the coolest things my 14-year-old eyes had ever seen, that movie was a confusing mess. Daredevil, I remember that movie to be amazing. Then I rewatched it right before the Netflix show came out, and it was practically unwatchable. It was even the director's cut, the cut everyone says still holds up. Trust me, it doesn't. The cringe of the playground scene was worse than I remembered. The dialogue was just bad. Even Ben Affleck, who I like, seemed wooded and unsure of how to portray Matt Murdock. Outside of Michael Clark Duncan's Kingpin, he was the best part. Jennifer Gardner fell flat, and Colin Farrell was over the top. He played Bullseye as if he were in a cheesy made-for-TV film. Don't get me wrong, there were great scenes in that movie, but there's no reason to watch it or to show this movie to anyone, ever. Then we have the Fantastic Four films. The Rise of the Silver Surfer is just an extension of the first. It literally didn't change anything. Like the other movies on this list, these two films acted more like a comic book than a film. Unnecessary scenes to show off their abilities, with Mr. Fantastic on the dance floor, or when Johnny Storm first transformed into the Human Torch while snowboarding, creating a hot tub for him and his date. There's just no excuse for these scenes, except to make people laugh, by being campy. And then there's Ghost Rider, a movie which couldn't possibly be made PG-13, was made PG-13. All studios during this era believed that they should make their films accessible to children, even when it's about a demon spawn, riding a fiery motorcycle, and disintegrating people with chains. Yeah, great idea, Fox. You know, I just don't think there's anything else I really need to say about this film. So moving on.
So, Peter, where should we go for your week off?
Well, I was thinking we could all go to Purgatory like we did last year.
This isn't bad. It's not that good, but yeah, it's not that bad.
It's so-so. Yeah, more or less.
Next, we move to the just okay ones, in my opinion. And there's going to be some people who disagree with me, but there's just two, and it's the first X-Men and the first Spider-Man. And these two are really the birth of this era of superhero film. They set the tone of the family-friendly movie that'll be a campy comic book film based on the action genre. They were good, at least for when they were made. They opened the door for all films coming after them. They showed the studios that there was money in superhero films again. Like every other movie I just listed, though, they were comic book movies first, and action movies second. Corny dialogue and directors who didn't seem fully aware on how to work with a big budget. This would change, though, when they both came back for their sequels.
Okay. I'm sorry, Angel. Is this better?
Yes, perfect. I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeVille.
X2 and Spider-Man 2, the very best of the era. These movies had it all. Money, returning directors who now had the experience in big-budget films, iconic fight scenes that gave them the feel of a real action movie, Wolverine going berserker in the mansion, Nightcrawler teleporting around the White House and kicking ass with his tail.
Holy shit, that's awesome.
Nowadays, though, there's just better Wolverine fight sequences. But Nightcrawler? Sadly not. All of his shots were beautiful. And Spider-Man fighting Doc Ock on the train, or the final battle around the fusion reactor? Pure gold. And unlike their predecessors, the CGI was nothing to scoff at. But if you're not a comic book fan, or you weren't in the early 2000s, you either heard or said yourself, it was good for a comic book movie. This was the thing that was hard to get past. People didn't see these as action movies. They saw them as a superhero flick. They were lumped in with Daredevil, the Hulk, and the Punisher. Don't get me wrong, they're not perfect by any means, but they took a door that was shutting and they wedged it open.
Wow, that was impressive.
There's one movie that I have not mentioned, and that is Batman. Batman Begins is the first superhero movie that really put the film first and the superhero second. Now, I'm not including Blade in this because no one except for comic book fans knew Blade was a comic book character. Just like it, though, it didn't matter who you were. You loved this movie. Christian Bale blew it out of the park, and it made us relate to a rich playboy. Seeing his depression and his search to make his life whole, and finally taking control of his life. This is something that everybody can relate to. Then Christopher Nolan shot this film beautifully, and we submerged ourselves into this world he created. Now, a lot more could be said about this movie, and a lot has already been said by so many other people. All I really need to add is that This film showed Marvel how to create a movie based on a superhero, and it set the new standard for us, the audience.
We speak different languages. Huh? We have different faces, but inside, we are same. Same, but different. But still same. Oh, thank you.
The Hulk and Iron Man. These two films were the first of the MCU, and both wildly different from each other. Whatever one did better at the box office would be setting the tone for the rest of the MCU. It was the dark and gritty nature of the Hulk versus the lighthearted nature of Iron Man. As we know, Iron Man won, and the Hulk became the black sheep of the Marvel Universe. Like Batman Begins, Marvel made us relate to the rich playboy protagonist, but in a very different way. 2008 was 2 years after the surge of the Iraq War. Almost everybody knew someone who was going to deploy overseas. When they updated Tony Stark's story to have him get ambushed and taken by terrorists, it played to real fears people were having. It discreetly played with the ideas of PTSD, but instead of going the darker route, it moved into a lighthearted film as he tried on a suit for the first time. This was the new Marvel, and these films would actually be made by Marvel. Yes, they are family friendly, but above that, they are large-budget films grounded in an idea and in the shell of a comic book movie. Though Iron Man 2 is often stated as one of the worst of the MCU, it had an important role to play, and that is universe building. It would show us that Iron Man wasn't alone, that if these films worked, we would have the Avengers. The first Thor was in the shell of a Shakespearean drama, and like Iron Man 2, it's not the favorite of most. But it showed us that Marvel wasn't going to treat every film the exact same. The first Captain America kept this idea going by having it in the shell of a war film. Then the Avengers showed us that yes, this is real. All these characters exist in the same world, and they would be seeing each other. Iron Man 3 is the journey of a man with PTSD realizing he's more than the sum of his parts. The Winter Soldier is a spy thriller, and Ant-Man is a heist film. Every Marvel film has found a way to follow a similar formula and yet tell a tale spanning any genre that also happens to be a superhero movie. Other studios didn't move on and put the film first. They continue to make movies that, in the early 2000s, would have been called good comic book movies, but they are actually just bad films. Take Green Lantern and The Amazing Spider-Man. Both films had overused and bad CGI and kept the idea of trying to make a movie purely based on the comic book. When it comes to DC and Sony, they have more than just one issue, and the biggest by far is the fact that they try to control too much. When we look at the MCU, all the lowest rated films are the ones Marvel did not let the directors have greater control with. Iron Man 2, Thor 2, Age of Ultron, and Ant-Man. All 4 of these films had complaints from the directors that there was too much studio involvement, and all 4 fell flat. It really looks like Kevin Feige gave his directors control for Phase 1, tried to butt in too much during Phase 2, and then backed away for Phase 3. DC and Sony never learned to get directors they trust and let them do what they do best. This seems to be the perfect time to mention the 2 films I didn't talk about in the beginning, Spider-Man 3 and X-Men 3. The reason I didn't talk about them is because they belong here. Both franchises were coming off of amazing films that were loved by both critics and audiences. Then the studios tried to intervene and guarantee that the third films would generate even more money. This over-involvement destroyed them, which would lead to both franchises being rebooted. Now, Kevin Smith tells a story of how he was hired to write a Superman script in the 90s. In the story, Superman would not be allowed to fly, not have his suit, and at the end, he had to fight a giant spider. This movie never got made, because it would have been horrible. If you let someone like Kevin Smith write and direct a film based on a comic book character, it will be good because he is someone who knows the lore and loves these characters. His first thought is not money. It's how can I do this justice? The road to the MCU was built on decades of campy superhero films. On one hand, it opened the eyes of the public to superheroes and showed the world that they weren't just for nerds. On the other hand, it almost killed the genre due to most people not wanting to waste their time going to the theaters to see the same movie over and over again. Batman Begins was the final piece of the puzzle by demonstrating that the audience wants a grounded film, not something taken from the pages of a comic. By getting directors they trust and letting them make movies they want to, the MCU has thrived where others failed.